Hi everyone! Today we're going to talk about fire safety in light of the tragic events that recently happened in Los Angeles. I decided to make a video about how to protect your home from fire, what to consider to prevent fires inside, and what steps you can take to minimize the risk of fire spreading from one house to another. Basically, how to do this in the best way possible. Today, I'll be joined by Alexey Korabliov, the founder of Zrobim Architects, to help with this topic. Alexey is in New York, and I'm currently in Shenzhen, China, so this is kind of a live broadcast. Hi, Alex, please tell us more. Alex, could you tell us what exactly happened in Los Angeles?
Well, there was a fire in Los Angeles. It was truly unprecedented. From what I understand, there hasn't been a fire of this scale in over 240 years or so. In other words, it's the largest one ever. And I guess the reason there's so much buzz around it is that a lot of celebrities were affected. It's still unclear how it all started. In other places, it was a natural fire. Honestly, it's become a sort of national rescue mission. No one is saying it's over, and no one knows how far it will go.
Let's talk about this, Alex. I've got a few ideas on how to design a home that minimizes fire risk. What's the most important thing in fire safety?
I'd say the most important thing is understanding that any house will burn if it's set on fire.
Everything burns, really.
There's this stereotype that you need to build, a stone or concrete house so it won't burn. That's not true.
At high enough temperatures, even concrete starts to melt and burn.
Yes, exactly. I often hear about Los Angeles, and the first thing people ask is why they even built houses out of wooden frames. Why did they go with wooden frames? It's so flammable. In their case, it seems like it didn't even matter what the houses were made of, because if it's a wooden house, it burns down. At least you don't need a bulldozer to tear it down afterward or deal with breaking up the concrete. But if your brick house burns down, you'll be left with charred brick walls. You'll have concrete that you'll be afraid to reuse because who knows what its structural integrity is like after the fire, and it'll be much more expensive to dispose of. So the first thing I want to say is that any house can burn. All safety measures should focus on protecting your home from being within reach of a fire source or ignition point.
Friends, what types of fires are there? In low-rise residential construction, there are a few important types of fires to consider. The first is crown-level fires, where the flames travel from rooftops to trees and spread with the wind, as was the case in Los Angeles. Then there are ground-level fires, which involve burning bushes and grass. Ground-level fires are usually easier to protect against compared to crown fires, especially when strong gusty winds are involved. The third type is internal fires, which can start due to short-circuited wiring, a fireplace in the house, or poorly planned pipe connections, resulting in a localized fire starting inside the house. And then, of course, this fire can evolve into another type of fire. Alex, from my experience, I can say that ground-level fires are the easiest to protect against. So share your thoughts on how to protect against ground-level fires.
Speaking of Los Angeles and what happened there, they actually have pretty clear rules because this is such a big issue for them. These fires occur every year. For example, they are required to have a non-flammable concrete perimeter around the house, about 5 feet wide, which is just under 2 meters. They also need to clear all bushes, shrubs, and fallen dry trees within 30 feet of the house. Beyond that, up to 100 feet, they need to maintain safety by trimming bushes that are taller than 4 feet. Regarding trees, they need to trim branches lower than 4 feet on taller trees to prevent ground fires from spreading upwards. Basically, I even have a document I can share which could be added to the video, explaining in detail what needs to be done. But unfortunately, in reality, these rules are often ignored, so things don't work as they should.
Friends, if you want this document Alex shared, send me a message on Instagram and I'll send it to you if needed. We'll be happy to share. Alex, please explain, how should we isolate the house from fires, particularly when dealing with ground-level fires? I have this idea. Besides fences and pathways, you can isolate the house. There was even this image, I think from Texas, where a fire burned everything around a house. But because there was a road, the house didn't burn down. So we need paths around the property to prevent the fire from spreading to the building or to the grass and bushes inside the lot.
You're absolutely right. The key is not to have flammable materials in the fire safety zone. There are specific rules about how close flammable materials can be to the house. The closer to the house, the fewer such materials should be allowed. Honestly, I don't know what to add specifically in terms of practical application, because in reality, why does everything burn down? It's obvious. Dry climate, strong winds, and flames spread so easily, but ultimately most houses just don't follow these fire safety rules. And it's not because people are careless, but because the housing density is so high. Even if you look at houses here like in Russia, Belarus, or across the post-Soviet region, there are rules, for example, that wooden houses should have about 49 feet between the roofs of one house and another. For concrete houses, I think the minimum distance is about 6 meters, roughly 20 feet. That's the absolute minimum spacing required between houses. And it's rarely adhered to because the plots are so small. In the US, in some expensive neighborhoods, the distances are even smaller. The houses are practically window to window.
It's due to the high cost per square foot.
Rules are rules, but life turns out differently. Honestly, it's often just luck, who gets lucky and who doesn't. For example, in Los Angeles, I've seen interviews with firefighters where they've been saying for years, 10 years or more, that if there's a strong wind and dry weather, nothing will save Los Angeles and the surrounding areas.
You know what we should talk about? Let's not focus specifically on Los Angeles. Let's talk more generally about how an ordinary person planning to build a house can make it safer, regardless of whether it's in Los Angeles or somewhere else, how to reduce the risk and likelihood of a fire. Let's discuss the placement of the house, how to position it to minimize the risk of fire.
I think the most important thing is to carefully consider the landscaping around the house. People often want to make it beautiful, plant greenery, create rock gardens, and add bushes. Some even like to plant tall trees near the house. But these are all potentially dangerous choices. The regulations explicitly say you shouldn't do that at all. And yet, people still do it because no one wants their house to look bare and surrounded by empty fields either. So, the first thing to focus on is landscaping. The second point is, of course, to follow building codes. Using proper materials for the facade also plays a big role in safety.
Let's talk about which facade materials are less flammable.
There's a clear classification for how resistant different materials are to ignition or combustion.
Typically, this is tested under direct exposure
Yes,
to
direct
open
exposure
flames.
to open flames. In the US, the standards are actually quite lenient. For example, a facade only needs to withstand flames for about 10 minutes. The building structure, I think, needs to hold up for about 30 minutes. But decking on terraces, that's just 3 minutes. If your terrace catches fire after 3 minutes, it's considered normal.
The house will burn to the ground, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand that these standards are not really designed to save your house from...
But to help you save yourself and get out in time, right?
Exactly, because as I said earlier, any house can burn down. The most important thing is to get out in time. Naturally, if you're using wood, you need to treat it with fire retardant protection.
About wood, I'd like to add that there are different types of treatments. There's one where you brush it on yourself. Well, your builder would do it, for instance. Then there's the treatment, where the wood is dipped into a special solution at the factory. Naturally, this kind of industrial treatment is much more effective against fire than brushing it on manually.
Yes, but honestly, all these treatments are somewhat conditional because after a couple of years, or even right at home, you could do an experiment. We actually conducted an experiment where we treated a frame post and compared it to an untreated one, throwing both into a fire. And honestly, both burned pretty well, let's put it that way. So, again, it probably just affects the time it takes.
When it starts to burn, it'll still burn, but it'll smolder a bit and won't turn into an open flame as quickly.
So it's worth noting that this isn't fire protection in the sense that you can now consider your house a bunker that'll save you from fire. No, it just gives you a bit more time to get out of the house.
Next up, stone, facades, and concrete. I think those are the ideal options. Any kind of stone or brick is non-flammable.
Yes, it doesn't burn. It's considered a non-flammable material, of course. Metal is also considered a non-flammable material, but it loses its strength after a certain temperature. And to me, metal is actually one of the most dangerous materials, because people assume it doesn't burn, which is true. But at a certain point, usually around 40 minutes, metal will just snap and collapse. With wood, you can at least visually predict and understand when it might collapse because it starts burning. But with metal, it's unpredictable. To me, those are the most dangerous situations because you think you're safe since you have a metal frame. But in reality, it can suddenly just completely collapse. It can crumble in an instant.
When it comes to ventilated facades, they typically have an aluminum base, but the insulation inside is made of polystyrene, which burns. Even though it might be considered non-flammable, but it burns pretty quickly.
It doesn't sustain combustion, it doesn't, but it melts, let's say.
Mineral wool, for example, burns less than polystyrene. But even mineral wool melts, and polystyrene ignites at certain temperatures. In a full-scale fire, it'll burn too.
Polystyrene is honestly a scary material because It's strongly recommended not to use polystyrene indoors or in living spaces because of fire hazards. When it burns, it releases styrene gas and just 1 or 2 breaths of it, and that's it. It's an extremely toxic material. So expanded polystyrene can only be used for exterior finishes. For example, I don't like houses made of sandwich panels where you have 2 OSB boards with polystyrene in between. So such houses not only have poor microclimates but are also very risky in terms of fire safety. Living in such a house is quite dangerous.
Polystyrene can be protected with a facade, so direct flames, sparks, or fire don't ignite the material or its framework. For instance, you can use a ventilated facade. A ventilated facade can, for example, be made of clinker bricks or other materials to ensure that direct exposure to fire can't ignite it. So, what other facade finishing materials are there?
Well, there's any kind of tile, like porcelain stoneware. Of course, it cracks at a certain temperature, and there are nuances too. In the budget segment, material options are strictly limited. In premium homes, we often use large format porcelain tiles as non-combustible materials. Instead of natural wood, we might use HPL panels, which are considered more fire resistant. We have a great example where all these materials are combined. This is the Vesninka house. We have a detailed and excellent review of it. If you're interested, you can check out the review of this house on our channel. From a fire safety perspective, it's done quite well. We used a minimal amount of flammable materials on the facade without sacrificing aesthetics.
By the way, friends, if you didn't know, Alexei has an amazing YouTube channel where you can find lots of interesting videos about beautiful and unique homes. By the way, let's list for people which facades ignite easily. SIP panels, because they usually have wooden frameworks.
Wooden siding and plastic siding, well, they certainly burn well, so to speak.
What else burns quickly and well?
Well, that's basically it. There's also wood shingle, which is another very popular material. It's wooden and widely used for house construction, and it burns well.
Planed boards? Yes, those too. What about it?
Planed boards, or something like fiber cement panels, are about 40% wood chips, so they burn well too. Other materials don't burn as easily, like fiber cement. Those are better options, or something like porcelain tiles, though they do crack easily, allowing fire to spread.
All right, let's move on to windows. It's clear that wooden windows catch fire quickly. Aluminum ones? Yes, what other options are there? Well, yes, probably aluminum windows.
Yes, exactly. There are basically 2 options.
Aluminum windows, and the glass should be fire-resistant glass, ideally.
Well, that's very expensive. I mean, fire-resistant glass does exist, but no one really goes to those lengths.
Yes, exactly. Making an entire house with such windows would be very costly. Fire safety in general is expensive, and we'll talk more about other systems later. The point is, besides shielding yourself from fire, you also need expensive materials that significantly raise the cost of the house.
Yes, that's true, exactly.
Let's talk about windows again. So we're talking about aluminum metal windows. I think another very dangerous element in a fire is the roof, especially if it's...
Yes, that's the most dangerous
The most
part.
dangerous, yes. So let's talk about roofing. What roofing materials catch fire quickly?
Well, again, wooden shingles, right? Wooden roofing. Asphalt shingles aren't...
They burn very well, yes.
Seam roofing, but I wouldn't call it ideal because it usually has a soundproofing membrane underneath and the metal itself is thin and heats up quickly. Probably the most reliable option is a ceramic roof. For example, as far as I know, in Florida, the cheapest insurance is for houses with ceramic roofs.
Not without reason.
Yes, exactly. Honestly, if you want to figure out what materials to use for your house, just ask an insurance company. They'll tell you
which materials burn the least,
what to build a house from to get the cheapest insurance, and they'll most likely recommend the safest materials in terms of fire resistance. That's it.
Friends, you need to understand that the most common cause of fires, apart from forest fires or other external factors, is, first of all, electricity, and secondly, open flames, such as heating systems. So, when it comes to electricity, what needs to be done? What kind of wiring is necessary? And how can you ensure safety to prevent internal fires? First of all, the electrical system should be of high quality, not the cheapest option, right?
Of course.
Yes, because cheaper electrical systems tend to fail more often. So when buying wires, you need to check their quality. First of all wires should be laid in non-flammable conduits. Alex, what else can be done to ensure electrical safety?
Install circuit breakers.
Circuit breakers. And by the way, do you know another point about circuit breakers? Typically, when a house is built, the developer installs the cheapest and simplest circuit breakers. They need to be replaced with good, high-quality ones because cheap breakers might fail to work, allowing a short circuit to persist, which could lead to a fire.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The only thing is, I've never seen an American house where people are as meticulous about these details as they are in post-Soviet countries. Here, using conduits for wiring is something only the elites do, like in houses worth, over $10 million. Usually, it's just a wire carelessly shoved between the insulation and that's it. It's the same with outlets. There's just one design of outlets here and they install it everywhere. Whether you have an $80 million home or an $80 home, the outlets will all be the same. Same with light switches. What I'm saying is, there's no emphasis here on playing around with safety levels or adding a premium feel to these systems, because they already have pretty strict standards, and these electrical standards have probably stayed at the level of the 1960s. These things are never really updated, so there are no innovations here, like modern breakers or uninterruptible power systems, or other things like that. They simply don't exist here. And it's not necessary because houses are built by developers, not private individuals. They don't include these features because it just increases the project cost, and no one needs that. And the people who buy these houses don't worry about it either because Americans are more attached to their jobs than their homes. They know that in a year they could easily move out of this house and forget about it. Making upgrades in key areas like engineering systems is of no interest to anyone. That's why even in $50 million homes, you'll find the most basic switches and outlets.
Let's brainstorm a bit. What should be changed to reduce the risk of fire hazards?
Well, probably correct calculation of wire cross-section. That's probably the most important thing, I'd say. So it's essential to create an electrical plan, of course. I'd say this is crucial, not just hiring somebody who will tell you from experience to use 2x1.5 cable in one spot and something thicker for the cooktop. Instead, you need a proper electrical design project to calculate the loads so your cables don't overheat or fail.
In short, you need an electrical design project that includes proper cable sizing calculations. You'll need to determine the power, voltage, cable thickness, the number of breakers, and an RCD system for emergency shutdown on the entire panel. Alright, we've covered the electrical side now. Let's talk about open flames in stoves and fireplaces, which also cause a lot of fires. Yes, direct flames, people need to understand that they create sparks. So around a fireplace, there should be metal sheets or some ceramic material to prevent the floor from catching fire. What else can you add about fireplaces and stoves?
The most important thing, I think, is to have a good fire extinguisher nearby.
By the way, friends, while we're on this, let me show you something. This is my apartment in China. So guys, 2 fire extinguishers just for one apartment.
You're well prepared.
A fire extinguisher should always be nearby.
Exactly right.
By the way, friends, fire extinguishers have an expiration date, so you need to understand that if it's expired, it won't function properly.
Anything can happen. It might lose pressure or just stop working altogether. In America, this is handled simply. Very few people use real fireplaces. Most use gas fireplaces. The flame is real, but at the same time, it's controlled. They have these beautiful fake logs that always look slightly charred and real, but in fact, they're just made from fiber-reinforced concrete. And the flames dance beautifully between them. A fireplace like this is safe. There are no sparks from it, and it can't overheat. It's fully controllable. Turn it off and it's completely extinguished. For those who love a real fire, meaning one from logs, there are certainly many factors to consider. The most important thing, and the biggest mistake people make, is related to the chimney.
Specifically, where the roof and ceilings connect to the chimney pipe.
In the past, asbestos was often used, but it would crack, burn, and I'm pretty sure, though I don't have exact statistics, more than half of fires were caused by these asbestos pipes. So the most important thing is to build the chimney properly.
Can you explain how to build it correctly and properly insulate it?
Well, there are special sandwich panels for chimneys, and there are specific calculations for the size of the chimney that a particular fireplace requires. The fireplace needs proper draft, and all the materials near the chimney and around the fireplace must be non-flammable, things like tiles, stone, or brick. That's pretty obvious, of course.
Okay, next we have grills. Yes, the biggest issue with grills is that they're portable, so they can be placed anywhere. Friends, you need to understand that when you move your grill and place it somewhere, it must be on a non-flammable surface. Don't put it on wood or other easily flammable materials. It should sit on metal, stone, or ceramic tiles.
I'd also add saunas and steam rooms to the list because they're another common fire hazard. You need to be cautious with sauna stoves. Even if they're modern, stylish, and new, they can still cause fires. For example, my stove has a steam generator, but if you don't add water, the heating elements can easily ignite something.
One more thing I'd like to add. Let's talk about some extravagant fire suppression systems. Remember the picture I mentioned of the house that survived while everything around it burned? It had a road as a buffer, and the owner also redirected their sprinkler system to spray water onto the roof, creating an extra protective barrier. So you could upgrade your lawn sprinkler system with higher water pressure. If a fire approaches, you could direct it onto the roof to keep it wet. But there are things to consider, like ensuring enough pressure. Second, you'll need water storage tanks, as proper pressure requires a pump. The pump will draw water from these tanks, which you'll need to install or bury somewhere. Keep in mind that if it's a major fire, like those in Los Angeles, which can burn for days, you won't be able to sustain continuous watering. The tanks will run out, and you won't be able to refill them fast enough to maintain full protection. You'll also need an additional power source, so you'll have to install a generator.
In California, firefighters actually recommend paying close attention to garden hoses. It might sound strange, but everyone has outdoor faucets for watering plants or lawns. It's important to have hoses that are long enough so that if a fire approaches, you can wet the roof, nearby bushes that might be dangerous, or the lawn to stop the fire from spreading to your house.
Another thing, if a fire is approaching your home and you have trees nearby, and say you have a day or so, then dealing with the trees will be tough. Trees are like family members in a way. They grow uniquely, sometimes even symbolically.
Bushes. I don't think anyone clears entire forests during a fire, but bushes do get cut down. For example, in California, firefighters don't just fight open flames. Many people are tasked with cutting and creating fire breaks by removing all vegetation and bushes to stop the fire from spreading further.
If you realize a fire is approaching, you can cut down your bushes. The key is to act in advance. It might feel like a pity, but sometimes you just have to prepare for the worst. You know, there's something else I'd like to add. If a fire is already heading your way, there are these fire extinguishing balls filled with powder. If something catches fire near you, you can throw the ball into the flames. It explodes, releasing powder, not foam, like in a fire extinguisher, and instantly puts out the fire. So you can stock up on these balls. They're pretty affordable, I think, and you can use them to help save your home. Let's brainstorm a bit, Alex. What do you think an ideal fire-resistant house should look like?
I think the ideal house wouldn't have large trees nearby whose branches could reach the roof or facade. There also shouldn't be large bushes nearby. It would have a wide paved perimeter, and the materials used for the facade, roof, and windows would need to be fire-resistant.
For example, a brick house.
Ideally, yes.
Yes, ideally, with metal windows, of course. The fence shouldn't be wooden. It should also be made of stone or some other non-flammable material. The fence should have its own foundation, and the house should have a paved perimeter. The roof should be ceramic.
I'd also add that you need a good garden hose stored on your property or in the shed ready for use, and you absolutely need to have a fire extinguisher for everyday emergencies at least. Well, that's pretty much it. The house should also comply with building codes, of course.
Ideally, the house should be placed as far as possible from other homes on neighboring plots. In a perfect world, with great views all around, you'd place the house in the center of the lot, though this isn't always practical. The electrical wiring should be in conduits with circuit breakers, and fireplaces should be installed properly. Ideally, you'd use a gas fireplace, or around fireplaces, there should be metal, tiles, or other non-combustible materials. The connections to the flue must be proper, and junction boxes should include active fire suppression systems. So, this is the kind of fantastic ideal house we've envisioned.
And as a final note, make sure to store matches and lighters out of children's reach.
Yes, absolutely. Friends, we hope you enjoyed our video. Share in the comments any other fire safety tips or what to do if a fire is already approaching. Be sure to check out the comments section to see what people are sharing. There are lots of great ideas there, especially if you're currently building or planning your home. You might find helpful tips. Alex, thanks for the great conversation, and thank you, friends, for watching the video all the way through.
Thanks for inviting me. I hope I was helpful and that you learned something new. Well, maybe we'll see you again on our channel.
Bye-bye.